This is a love story that begins with the boldest thing a woman has ever said to a stranger. Not a love letter, not a glance across a ballroom, not the careful, choreographed beginning that London's aristocracy spent considerable effort orchestrating between the correct people in the correct circumstances at the correct moment. This begins on a moving train, with a woman who has approximately 30 seconds before the wrong people look in the wrong direction, and a duke who has spent the better part of a decade ensuring that nobody surprises him. She surprises him completely. Her name is Charlotte Lewis. She is 23 years old, the daughter of a respectable London solicitor, and she is at this specific moment in genuine trouble, the kind of trouble that does not announce itself politely before arriving, but appears all at once, in the form of two men in the first-class carriage of the London to Edinburgh Express who are looking for her and who must not, under any circumstances, find her. Alone? His name is Rodolph Hampton, Duke of Ashbourne. He is 36 years old, one of the most powerful men in England, and he is sitting in his private first-class compartment with a document he has been failing to read for the past 20 minutes, which is unusual because Rodolph Hampton is not generally a man who fails to do things he has decided to do. He is, at this specific moment, alone. He has been alone in most of the ways that actually matter, for considerably longer than 20 minutes. He does not know yet what is about to happen. What is about to happen is this. A young woman is going to open the compartment door, sit down in the seat across from him, lean forward and say, in a voice low enough not to carry but direct enough to leave no room for misunderstanding, the words that will change both of their lives completely. Stay with us. This is where it begins. Charlotte had exactly 30 seconds. She had almost missed the train entirely. The bag had taken longer to pack than she had allocated, not because she was indecisive, but because she had been packing the minimum necessary for Edinburgh, while simultaneously ensuring that nothing in the arrangement of her uncle's townhouse, where she had been staying for the past 3 weeks under the specific watchful attention of a household that reported to him, suggested imminent depart. She had removed one dress, replaced it with another, left the first precisely where it had been, checked the time, replaced the second dress with the first, and finally accepted that she was overthinking the packing and left with 2 dresses and the folder of documents she had been accumulating for 6 weeks and the single most important thing she owned. Her copy of the trust summary her father had given her, which lived always in the inner pocket of her coat. She had walked to Victoria Station rather than taking a carriage, because carriages required destinations given to drivers who could be asked about destinations, and she had arrived at the platform with 11 minutes to spare and had purchased her ticket at the window, with the specific efficiency of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times in her head and is now simply executing it. The mistake had been the platform. She had gone to the wrong platform first. The Edinburgh train ran from platform 7, not platform 9, and she had corrected this with 6 minutes remaining and had walked to platform 7 at a pace that was not quite a run, but was the kind of fast walking that produces the same effect on breathing without producing the social visibility of an obviously hurrying woman. She had boarded with 4 minutes to spare. She had moved immediately through first class towards second because second-class tickets were less expensive, and she was working with money that needed to last until Edinburgh, and the outcome of whatever awaited her there were both secured. She had been almost at the joining point of first and second when she had looked back through the glass panels and seen Graves and his associate boarding at the far end of the train, and then she had counted 30 seconds and made her assessment and opened the 4th compartment door. She had counted them roughly from the moment she saw them board the train at Victoria Station, 2 men in dark coats moving through the carriages with the specific, practiced efficiency of people conducting a search rather than simply finding their seats. She had recognized the taller one immediately, Mr. Graves, her uncle's solicitor, whose presence on this train meant that her uncle had not, as she had hoped, been delayed in London. Her uncle had not been delayed. He had sent people ahead. She had been standing in the corridor between second and first class, calculating. Second class was already being walked. She had seen Graves's associate moving through it moments before. First class was next. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the section of corridor where she was standing, and if they found her there, alone and clearly attempting to avoid detection, the conversation that followed would be conducted entirely on their terms. She needed different terms. She looked through the glass panels of the first-class compartments as she moved quickly down the corridor. Most were occupied by groups, families, traveling companions, people who would find the sudden addition of an unknown young woman to their party confusing and potentially vocal about the confusion. She needed a single occupant, someone she could approach without generating immediate witness to the approach. She found him in the fourth compartment, a man alone, dark coat, a document folder on the seat beside him, the particular quality of stillness that suggested someone who had organized his space around the assumption of continued privacy. She registered in the half-second of assessment available to her that he was considerably younger than she had vaguely hoped for and considerably more arresting in his physical presence than she was prepared to efficiently manage. She registered the quality of the coat and the specific bearing that certain kinds of men acquire through years of having rooms recalibrate around their entrance. She registered most practically that he was alone. She opened the door. She sat down across from him. She leaned forward. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said, and her voice was steadier than her heart rate, which was remarkable given her heart rate. "You do not know me and I do not know you, and under ordinary circumstances I would not do this. These are not ordinary circumstances. For the next 3 hours, or until we reach Edinburgh, whichever comes first, I am going to need you to be my husband." She watched him process this. She watched the specific sequence of responses that crossed his face. Surprise, then the controlled management of surprise, then something she could not immediately classify, a quality of attention that was not alarm and not amusement exactly, but something more considered than either. "Your husband," he said. "Yes, there are 2 men in the corridor who are looking for me. I cannot be found alone. If I am your wife traveling with you, the situation becomes considerably more manageable." She paused. "I recognize this is an extraordinary request. I recognize I am a complete stranger. I will explain as much as I can, as quickly as I can, if you will agree." He looked at her for a long moment. Through the glass panel of the compartment door, she could see the corridor. She could see the dark coat of Graves's associate moving closer. "What is your name?" he said. "Charlotte Lewis. How long do we have before they reach this compartment?" She looked at the corridor. "Perhaps 15 seconds. He picked up the document folder from the seat beside him and set it on the overhead rack. He moved the second cup from the tea service on the small table to her side. He arranged his own position with the subtle adjustment of someone who understands space and how its arrangement communicates. "Sit back," he said quietly, "and look comfortable." She sat back. She looked as comfortable as her heart rate permitted. The compartment door opened. Graves's associate looked in. He saw a gentleman and a lady clearly together, the tea service between them, the woman's posture at ease, the man's attention directed toward her with the particular quality of someone engaged in private conversation. The associate's eyes moved across the scene with practiced assessment, found nothing that indicated what he was looking for, and moved on. The door closed. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Thank you," Charlotte said. "You have 10 minutes, Rodolphe said, "before I require the explanation you promised." She told him the necessary version first, the minimum required to explain the situation without requiring him to know everything. Her uncle, Arthur Lewis, had been appointed her guardian following the death of her parents 3 years prior. Her parents' estate, modest but genuine, had been left in trust for Charlotte until her 25th birthday or her marriage, whichever came first. Her uncle had been managing the trust in the interim, which should have been a straightforward administrative arrangement, and had turned out to be considerably less straightforward than it should have been. She had discovered 6 weeks ago, through a conversation she was not meant to overhear, that the trust's management had involved certain decisions regarding certain investments that would not, if examined closely by the appropriate parties, reflect well on anyone involved in making them. She had also discovered that her uncle's solution to this potential examination was to arrange her marriage, quickly, to a man of his choosing, before her 25th birthday, transferred the trust's management to Charlotte's direct control, and made the examination considerably more likely. The man of his choosing was a Mr. Gerald Crane, who had 2 significant qualities from her uncle's perspective. He was indebted to her uncle for reasons she did not fully know, and he was not the kind of man who would examine financial arrangements with any inconvenient thoroughness. She had declined. Her uncle had explained, with the specific cold clarity of someone who believes they hold all available leverage, that her declining was not, strictly speaking, an option he was prepared to accommodate. She had decided to go to Edinburgh. Her father's oldest friend, a solicitor named Mr. Whitmore, lived in Edinburgh, and had, she believed, sufficient knowledge of her parents' original intentions regarding the trust to be genuinely useful to her position. She had not told her uncle she was going. She had packed 1 bag, purchased a ticket, and boarded the train at Victoria Station with the specific, careful speed of someone who understands that their window of undetected movement is limited. Rodolphe listened to all of this without interrupting. He had the quality, she noticed it immediately, and filed it alongside the other observations she had been making, of someone who listens with genuine attention, rather than simply waiting for the relevant portion to end. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The men in the corridor," he said. "They have been sent to return you to London. To return me to my uncle, yes. And if they find you alone on this train, you have no practical means of refusing to accompany them." "I have no legal means," she said. "I am still under my uncle's guardianship for another 14 months, practically alone, on a train." "Correct. But as my wife," he said, with the specific precision of someone working through a logical problem, "you are traveling under my protection, which creates a social and practical situation considerably more difficult for two of your uncle's solicitors to navigate." "That was my assessment, yes." He looked at her. She looked back. Through the window, the London suburbs were giving way to countryside. "Why Edinburgh specifically?" he said. "If you could reach any solicitor in London with knowledge of your parents' estate—" "Mr. Whitmore was my father's witness to the original trust documentation," she said. "He has copies of documents my uncle does not know he has. In London, my uncle's connections make accessing the relevant legal channels considerably more complicated. In Edinburgh, I have Mr. Whitmore and a jurisdiction where my uncle's specific social leverage is less immediately relevant." He nodded slowly. "You have planned this carefully." "I have been planning it for 6 weeks," she said. "The one thing I did not plan was them boarding at Victoria." "And yet," he said, "you adapted within 30 seconds. "I did not have longer than 30 seconds, she said. "No," he said, "you did not." He picked up his tea. "Tell me about the trust. Not the summary, the detail. If I am to be your husband for 3 hours, I should understand what I am actually dealing with." She looked at him with genuine surprise. "You are offering to help. Beyond the compartment. I am asking questions," he said carefully. "The answers will determine what help, if any, I am positioned to offer. If this story has already caught you, subscribe now. We release new Regency romance episodes every week, and we would not want you to miss what comes next." Charlotte had not known when she sat down who she was sitting across from. She had also not known when she first assessed him through the glass panel that the Duke of Ashbourne's famous reserve had been produced not by fundamental coldness, but by the specific sequence of losses between his 23rd and 27th years. His father's death, the trust mismanagement's discovery, 2 years of repair, and the conclusion, practical, unsentimental, that the most reliable approach to his emotional life was to restrict its exposure to the minimum necessary to function adequately. He had not, in 9 years, met anyone who disrupted this approach. What was disrupting it now, he recognized with specific surprise, was that the conversation in this compartment felt entirely natural. He was not managing it. He was simply having it. She had seen a gentleman, alone, expensive coat, a quality of bearing that indicated someone accustomed to having their space respected. She had not, in the 30-second window of practical assessment available to her, recognized the face. She recognized it now, as they talked, in the specific gradual way of someone whose memory is assembling information that was present, but not immediately organized. She had seen him, she realized, at 2 social events in the preceding year, events she had attended on the edge of, the kind of events where someone in her social position observes rather than participates. She had not retained his name at the time, because names at events she observed from the edge were not generally relevant information. She retained it now, because the woman who had been sitting near her at the second event had spoken it with the particular tone London women reserved for men they considered significantly beyond their reach. The Duke of Ashbourne, the Ashbourne fortune, Rodolphe Hampton. She kept this recognition off her face with the practiced composure of someone who has spent 3 years being very careful about what she allows to be visible. "You are very calm," he observed, partway through her account of the trust documentation. "I am not calm," she said. "I am managing the appearance of calm, which I find considerably more useful in most situations. There is a distinction, a significant one. Genuine calm requires the absence of fear. The appearance of calm requires only the absence of visible panic, which is a considerably more achievable standard." He looked at her with the specific expression she would come to associate with moments when she said something he had not anticipated. "Where did you learn that distinction?" he said. "From my father," she said. "He was a solicitor. He believed and taught me to believe that legal situations specifically, and difficult situations generally, were best navigated by presenting the appearance of whatever emotional state would be most useful to your position, regardless of what you were actually experiencing. Your father taught you legal strategy. He taught me to think clearly under pressure," she said. "The legal strategy I developed myself from reading his books after he died." Another pause. The train moved through green countryside. Rain was beginning against the windows, the specific soft rain of an English afternoon that sounds like a conversation happening just too quietly to hear. "The trust documentation," Rodolphe said. "Your father's original instructions. Do you know their specific language regarding the conditions of management?" "I know them approximately," she said. "Mr. Whitmore will have the exact language." "Approximately is sufficient for the moment." He set down his tea. "Tell me what you remember," she told him. He listened with the specific focused quality she was beginning to understand was simply how he processed information, completely present, no part of his attention elsewhere, the kind of listening that her father had described as the most important professional skill, and that she had observed in the 3 years since his death to be remarkably rare. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the rain on the window. "Your uncle's arrangement is vulnerable," he said. "Not irreparably from his perspective, but vulnerable. If Whitmore has the documentation you believe he has, and if the original trust language specifies the conditions you believe it specifies, your position is considerably stronger than your uncle has apparently told you." "You know trust law," she said. "I know it adequately," he said. "I manage several family trusts. My solicitor has educated me more thoroughly than is strictly necessary for most dukes, because I prefer to understand what I am being asked to authorize." She looked at him. "Most men of your position simply sign what their solicitors recommend." "Most men of my position," he said, "have not had reason to learn what happens when you sign things you do not understand." The sentence arrived with a quality that indicated something specific behind it, something he had not planned to say quite that directly and had not fully decided, now that he had said it, whether to elaborate on. She did not press. She filed it alongside the other things she was noticing. They were not quiet for the remainder of the journey. This surprised them both. Charlotte had expected, had hoped for, a period of sufficient convincing proximity to satisfy any investigation by the corridor, followed by whatever remained of the journey, in the kind of polite, mutually comfortable silence that strangers who have resolved an immediate practical crisis generally settle into. Rodolphe had expected, had intended, to offer the minimum necessary assistance and to return, once the situation was resolved, to the document he had been failing to read. Neither of these things happened. The conversation had a quality neither of them had planned for, the specific ease of two people who have been, for whatever reason, equally starved of genuine exchange, and who discover, unexpectedly, that the other person is the kind of conversational partner they had stopped believing they would find. The rain was heavier now. The window had become something between a painting and a mirror. The outside world rendered softly, and in it the reflection of the compartment, the two of them visible as shapes in the glass, close together in the specific proximity of shared small space. Charlotte had not spent much time in genuine proximity with someone who actually listened. She had spent considerable time in proximity with people who performed listening, the social version, which involved appropriate nods and the occasional interjection to demonstrate engagement. Her uncle performed listening very well. Mr. Crane, when she had met him once at her uncle's insistence, had performed listening precisely long enough to assess whether the information he was receiving was useful to his interests, and had then moved on when it proved not to be. Rodolphe was doing something different. He was listening in the way that changed the quality of what she was saying, because when someone listens that completely, you find yourself saying things more accurately than you had planned to, because the accuracy is what the listening calls for. She was aware, with the specific awareness of someone who has been managing her own responses very carefully for 3 years, that she was being more honest in this compartment than she had been in most conversations of the preceding 36 months. She was aware that this was partly the specific permission of a situation that existed outside ordinary social consequence. And she was aware, in a dimension she was not quite ready to examine directly, that it was also partly the man doing the listening. She looked at the rain on the glass and said nothing about any of this. He asked her about her father, not as social filler, not as polite inquiry, but with genuine curiosity about the specific man she had described, the solicitor who had taught his daughter legal strategy and the appearance of calm. She told him things she had not told anyone in 3 years, because the situation had produced a specific honesty that ordinary social occasions did not. They were strangers on a train who would likely never meet again, which paradoxically made certain truths considerably easier to state than they might have been to people she would have to continue encountering. She asked him about what he had said, the comment about signing things he did not understand. He looked at her for a moment, and she could see him deciding. And then he told her about his father's estate, the specific, expensive, humiliating disaster of a trust arrangement that his father's solicitors had constructed without adequate oversight, and that Rodolphe had inherited at 25 along with the title, and the 2 years that had followed of working to repair what the inadequate oversight had cost. "That is why you manage the trust details yourself," she said. "That is why," he confirmed, "and why you listen to my situation with that particular quality of attention." He looked at her. "What particular quality of attention?" "The kind that recognizes something familiar," she said, "not identical to your own experience, but adjacent to it. You have been in a situation where the legal arrangements surrounding people you cared about were not what they were represented to be." He was quiet for a moment. "My father trusted the wrong people," he said. "He was not a careful man in the specific domain of financial management. He was a remarkable man in other dimensions. But in that one he trusted when he should have verified, and the cost was considerable." "I am sorry," she said. "It was a long time ago," he said, "and I managed it." A pause. "As you will manage yours." She looked at him. The rain on the windows had intensified, turning the English countryside into something soft and green and slightly impressionistic, the kind of landscape that exists primarily in the moment of seeing it from a moving train. "You have genuine confidence in that assessment," she said. "It is not performance." "I have genuine confidence in your assessment of your own situation," he said. "You described it accurately. You identified the relevant legal vulnerabilities. You understood what documentation you needed and where to find it, and you adapted to an unexpected obstacle within 30 seconds. Those are not the qualities of someone who fails to manage her own situation." Charlotte looked at the window for a moment. Nobody had told her anything like that in 3 years. Her uncle had told her, repeatedly and with the specific authority of someone whose legal position gave him the right to tell her things she was not permitted to contradict, that she was inexperienced and impractical, and prone to the kind of emotional reasoning that made women unsuitable for managing their own financial affairs. She had believed, in the part of herself that had not fully resisted the message, approximately a third of this assessment. She was not entirely sure, looking at the rain-blurred countryside, what she believed now. He appeared at the compartment door, 40 minutes outside of Edinburgh, and he did not simply look through the glass this time. He knocked. Then he opened the door without waiting for a response, which told Charlotte everything she needed to know about what her uncle had authorized him to do. "Miss Lewis," Graves said. He was a tall man, 50, with the specific practiced composure of someone who delivers unwelcome news professionally and has learned to do it without visible discomfort. "Your uncle is concerned for your welfare. I have instructions to ensure your safe return to London." Charlotte had been expecting this. She had known, when she heard the compartment door, that the second inspection of the first-class carriages would be more thorough than the first. "Mr. Graves," she said, with a composure she was generating from the same source her father had taught her to generate it. "I believe you are familiar with my husband." Graves looked at Rodolphe. His composure held, but the specific quality of how it held, the particular rigidity of someone managing a significant surprise, told her what she needed to know about whether the name was recognized. "Your Grace," Graves said, and the shift in register was unmistakable. "Mr. Graves." Rodolphe's voice carried the specific flat precision of a man who is exercising authority without raising it. "My wife has explained something of the situation regarding her uncle's guardianship and the trust management. I believe the relevant matter is before the court shortly, and I would suggest that any action taken by you in this compartment, at this moment, be considered in light of how it will appear in those proceedings." A silence. "My instructions," Graves began. "Your instructions," Rodolphe said, "are from her guardian. As of this afternoon, the question of whether her guardian has been managing her interest appropriately is one that several people with relevant legal standing intend to examine carefully. I would think very carefully, Mr. Graves, about which side of that examination you wish to be found on." Another silence. Graves looked at Charlotte. She looked back with the appearance of calm her father had taught her, and felt beneath it the specific wild hope of someone watching something shift in their direction. "I will be in communication with Mr. Lewis," Graves said finally. "I would expect so," Rodolphe said. Graves closed the compartment door. Charlotte waited until the sound of his footsteps had fully receded. "That was not strictly accurate," she said. "The matter is not currently before the courts." "No," Rodolphe agreed, "but it could be. And if he reports what I said to your uncle, and your uncle spends the next several days preparing for legal proceedings, rather than assuming your return is simply a matter of retrieval, you gain time and he loses initiative." He paused. "Was I wrong to do it without asking?" She looked at him. "No, you were not wrong. I made a decision on your behalf without consulting you. You made a decision that required acting faster than consultation permitted," she said. "There is a difference, and you know the difference, which is why you are asking." He looked at her with the expression she was learning, the one that meant she had said something that reorganized something in how he was thinking. "You are very precise," he said. "My father was a solicitor," she said. Precision was the family religion. "What do you think happens when the train reaches Edinburgh? Leave your prediction in the comments. We are almost there." The landscape through the window was changing. The soft English fields had given way to something wilder, the specific austere beauty of the border country that always announced Scotland's approach, with its own particular vocabulary of stone and heather and the occasional dark loch visible in the far distance. They had 1 hour remaining. Charlotte was aware of this, with the specific mixed feeling of someone who has simultaneously been managing a crisis successfully and discovering something she had not intended to discover. The crisis management was going well. The other thing was less comfortable to examine. "When we arrive," she said, "I will go directly to Mr. Whitmore. I have his address." "I know Whitmore," Rodolphe said. She looked up. "You know him. He was the solicitor who handled my father's trust reassessment after the difficulty I described. He is a careful and thorough man." He paused. "I will send him a note ahead. It will help him understand the urgency of the situation." "You do not need to do that," she said. "I know I do not need to," he said. And the echo of her own phrasing, the distinction she had made earlier between needing and choosing, was deliberate, she understood, and told her something. She was quiet for a moment. "Rodolphe," she said. His name arrived in her mouth, as though she had been saying it for years rather than hours. She saw him register this and did not attempt to retroactively formalize it. "What happens after this? After Edinburgh and Whitmore and the trust situation is resolved, whatever direction it resolves in, we will have spent 3 hours as husband and wife on a train, and then we will be strangers again." He was quiet for a longer moment than any of the previous ones. "I find," he said carefully, "that the prospect of returning to being strangers is considerably less comfortable than I anticipated when you sat down." "We have been talking for 2.5 hours, she said. "Yes, and I have had, in those 2.5 hours, more genuine conversation than in the preceding several months combined. That is not a compliment I am manufacturing for the occasion. It is a simple statement of what is accurate." She looked at the window. Scotland was fully visible now, the specific wild quality of the northern landscape that England's tidy fields did not produce. "I sat down across from a stranger," she said, "because I had 30 seconds and no other option." "Yes, and the stranger turned out to be—" She stopped. "The stranger turned out to be what?" he said. She looked at him directly. "The kind of person I did not expect to find in a first-class compartment on a train I boarded in a hurry because my uncle sent solicitors to retrieve me." "What kind of person is that?" "Someone who listens," she said. "Actually listens. And understands what I say. And does not assume that because I am a woman in a difficult situation, the difficulty is my fault or my limitation." She paused. "And someone who knows trust law adequately, which was specifically useful today, though I recognize that is a more practical observation than the others." He almost smiled. She saw it, the specific quality of the almost, the way something in his face relaxed fractionally. "Charlotte," he said. Her name, like his, arrived as though it had been said before. "I am going to do something that is either entirely reasonable or entirely inappropriate depending on how you receive it." "Do it," she said, "and I will tell you which." "When the matter with your uncle is resolved," he said, "and when you are in a position to make any decision about your own future free of any duress related to the trust or the guardianship, I would like to call upon you. Not before that. Not while you are managing a situation that might make any association with me seem practically useful rather than genuinely chosen. But after, when the choice would be entirely yours." The train began to slow. Edinburgh's outskirts were appearing at the window's edge, stone buildings, the specific dark and beautiful skyline of the northern city. "That is entirely reasonable," she said, "and not inappropriate in the least." "Good," he said. "Though I would like to note," she said, "that I chose to sit down across from you before I knew anything about your legal knowledge or your connection to Mr. Whitmore or your ability to discourage solicitors in corridors. I chose based on the 30-second assessment of someone who was in a hurry." "What did the 30-second assessment find?" She looked at him. "Someone worth the risk," she said. The platform at Edinburgh Waverley was everything a train platform in late autumn should be. Cold, slightly damp, smelling of coal smoke and the specific stone and rain combination that was Edinburgh's own particular scent, with the enormous Victorian architecture of the station, creating the specific acoustics of a space designed for arrivals and departures of consequence. They stood on the platform together, which was, they were both aware, the last moment of the specific proximity that the past 3 hours had constructed. Charlotte's bag was in her hand. Rodolphe's travelling cases were being managed by a porter who had appeared with the specific automatic efficiency of someone accustomed to identifying which arriving passengers required immediate assistance and providing it. "Whitmore's office is on George Street," Rodolphe said. 20 minutes from the station by carriage. I will send the note immediately." "Thank you," she said. "Your uncle will assume you are returning to London voluntarily within the week," he said. "He will not expect Edinburgh legal proceedings. Whitmore will understand the timeline." "Yes." She looked at him. They were standing on a platform in Edinburgh, having spent 3 hours as husband and wife on a train, having discussed trust law and her father and his father and what genuine listening looks like in Scotland from a rain-blurred window. "This has been," she said, "a very unusual afternoon. The most interesting afternoon I have had in some time," he said. A pause. The platform moved around them. Other passengers, porters, the specific organized chaos of a busy station. "Rodolphe," she said. "Charlotte. The matter with my uncle," she said. "I believe, based on what I know and what Whitmore has, that it will be resolved within 6 to 8 weeks. That seems a reasonable estimate." After which, she said, "If you intended to call, I would be at my father's old house in London. Number 12, Kensington Gardens Terrace." He looked at her. 6 to 8 weeks. "Approximately," she said. "I will note the address," he said. "I assumed you would," she said. And she picked up her bag and walked across the platform toward the station exit, and she did not look back. Not because she did not want to, but because the particular quality of the moment seemed to require moving forward rather than looking behind. She was almost at the exit when she heard behind her, through the station's ambient noise, "Charlotte." She turned. He was still standing where she had left him, on the platform, with the specific quality of a man who has said something without entirely planning to. "The note to Whitmore," he said. "I will deliver it, personally." She looked at him across the length of the platform, through the coal smoke and the cold Edinburgh air. "I thought you might," she said. "Mr. Whitmore was 71. Small, possessed of the specific sharp-eyed precision that the best solicitors developed through decades of close work with documents that concealed as much as they revealed, and he had opened his office door on George Street at 7 in the evening to find 2 visitors he had not expected. Charlotte Lewis, whom he had not seen since her father's funeral, and Rodolphe Hampton, Duke of Ashburn, whose note had arrived 40 minutes prior via a footman dispatched with unmistakable urgency. "My dear child," he said to Charlotte, and then he showed her in and made tea and listened with the same quality of complete attention she had encountered earlier that afternoon to everything she had to tell him. He produced from a locked drawer of his filing cabinet, the drawer itself a document from a previous century, all brass fittings and solid oak, a folder that had been sitting in that drawer for 3 years, waiting for exactly this conversation. "Your father," Mr. Whitmore said, setting the folder on his desk with the care of someone handling something that has been kept safe for a specific purpose and has now arrived at the moment of its use, "was a man of considerable foresight in certain respects. He knew your uncle's character. He did not trust it entirely. He did not say so directly. Family loyalty prevented that. But he constructed this trust documentation with the specific intention of making certain classes of mismanagement legally visible in ways that your uncle would not immediately recognize as visible." Charlotte looked at the folder. She had believed this was what she would find. Seeing it produced a specific, complicated feeling: grief for her father, gratitude for his foresight, and the particular emotion of someone who has been vindicated in something they have believed against resistance. Rodolphe was seated near the window, having said very little since they arrived, present in the specific quiet way she had already come to recognize as how he was present when the situation required him to support rather than lead. "What is the timeline," he said, "for the legal proceedings?" Whitmore removed his glasses, cleaned them with the unhurried efficiency of a man to whom unhurried efficiency is simply a professional baseline. 3 weeks for the initial filing, 6 to 8 weeks for the full hearing, given the documentation available. He replaced his glasses. "Your uncle's position is not tenable, Miss Lewis. It was not tenable the moment he made the first decision he made. Your father simply ensured, with considerable cleverness, that the untenable nature of that position would become legally demonstrable at the appropriate moment." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "He knew," she said. "He knew this might happen." "He suspected it was possible," Whitmore said with the precision of a man who does not overstate. "He did not know. He hoped he was wrong, but he prepared for the possibility that he was right." A pause. "He was a remarkable solicitor, your father." "I know," Charlotte said. "I know he was." The weeks that followed were by every practical measure considerably more difficult than the afternoon on the train had been. The legal proceedings required her daily attention, extensive coordination with Whitmore, and the specific sustained effort of someone managing a genuinely complicated legal situation with the resources available to her, which were, initially, primarily her own competence and the notes she had made across 6 weeks of preparing for exactly this. Her uncle did not take the situation graciously. He deployed exactly the social and legal levers available to him, and there were more of them than she had fully accounted for. There were weeks when the outcome seemed genuinely uncertain. There were specific days when she sat with Whitmore's documents spread across her rented Edinburgh sitting room table and found herself, despite everything, genuinely frightened. On one of those days, a letter arrived, not a dramatic letter, a simple one in handwriting she recognized immediately, precise, specific, without excessive flourish. It said in its entirety, "Miss Lewis, Whitmore writes that the proceeding is progressing according to his expectation. I have taken the liberty of asking 2 colleagues, familiar with your uncle's legal counsel, to make themselves available to Whitmore should he require particular support on the procedural questions likely to arise in the 4th week. I took this liberty without consulting you, which I recognize follows the pattern we established on the train, and which I acknowledge requires specific justification in each instance, rather than simply ongoing assumption. The justification in this case is that the intervention was time-sensitive, and the outcome seemed likely to align with your interests. I hope I was not wrong about that. Ashbourne." She read the letter twice, then she wrote back. Her reply said, in part, "You were not wrong. You were, characteristically, useful at precisely the moment usefulness was required, and in precisely the way it was required, without requiring acknowledgement or generating obligation. I find I have very little patience remaining for pretending this is not exactly what I have been hoping someone would be." She sent the letter. She returned to Whitmore's documents. The 4th week produced exactly the procedural complication Rodolphe's colleagues helped resolve. The 6th week produced the court date. The 8th week produced the outcome. Her uncle's management of the trust was found to have been conducted contrary to the terms specified in the original documentation. The relevant financial remedies were identified. Charlotte's control of her own estate was transferred to her direct authority 14 months before her 25th birthday, and approximately 7 years after her uncle had apparently decided that her financial future was a resource for his own benefit. She sat in Whitmore's office afterward, with the papers that formalized this outcome in her hands, and felt something she had not felt in 3 years, complete, not happy exactly, in any simple sense. The situation had cost her genuine difficulty and genuine grief, but complete, herself, in possession of her own life. "Your father," Whitmore said, watching her, "would have been very pleased." "Yes," she said, "I believe he would." She had thought about this moment in the 8 weeks since Edinburgh, with the specific, careful distance of someone who has learned, through experience, to distinguish between what they are hoping for and what is actually likely. She had not permitted herself to assume. She had permitted herself to notice that she was hoping, which was itself a change from the preceding 3 years, when hoping for specific things involving other people had seemed like an unnecessary additional risk to a life that already contained sufficient risk. She had received his letters with the specific combination of genuine delight and practical skepticism that she brought to most things she valued, glad of them, reading them twice, refusing to construct a narrative about what they meant beyond what they actually said, and then reading them a third time before putting them in the desk drawer, where they had accumulated across 8 weeks into a collection that she did not, when she thought about it, intend to discard. She had written back with similar care, honest, specific, neither more nor less than what was accurate. She had told him in the letter after the 4th week that she appreciated the colleagues he had sent to Whitmore. She had told him in the letter after the 6th week that the proceeding was going well, and that Whitmore's analysis of the original trust language had been precisely what she had believed it would be. She had told him in the letter after the 8th week that the matter was resolved and that she would be returning to London the following Tuesday. She had not told him in any of the letters that she had thought about him every day. She had decided that this was a truth she would tell in person if the occasion arose, and not in a letter that might arrive without the context of how he received it. The occasion had now arisen. She had been back in London for 2 weeks when he called. It was a Tuesday afternoon, which struck her later as fitting, not the dramatic perfect weather day of romantic convention, but an ordinary Tuesday with grey sky and the particular smell of late autumn London settling into its own specific season. She was in her father's library, which was now her library, working through the estate accounts with the focused attention she had been applying to everything for the past 8 weeks, when Mrs. Holt, the housekeeper who had stayed, across 3 years of difficult circumstances, out of loyalty to her parents that had transferred without formal discussion to Charlotte, appeared at the door. "The Duke of Ashbourne, miss," she said. "He asks if you are receiving." Charlotte set down her pen. She looked at the library, at the books her father had collected across 30 years, at the desk where she had read his documents and taught herself legal strategy, at the window that looked out onto Kensington Gardens terrace, where the trees were doing what November trees did. "Please show him in," she said. He appeared in the doorway in the same dark coat he had been wearing on the train, or one very like it, she thought, and then decided it did not matter, and looked across the library at her with the specific quality of attention she had spent 8 weeks thinking about considerably more than she had organized into a plan for what to do about it. "You came on a Tuesday," she said. "I did," he said. "I thought you might come on a grander occasion." "I find," he said, crossing the library toward her with the purposeful ease of someone who has decided something clearly, "that the grandest occasions are generally the ones that begin on ordinary Tuesdays." She stood. They were facing each other across the width of the library table, and the specific quality of the distance between them was not, by any objective measure, very far. "The trust matter is resolved," she said. "I know," Whitmore wrote. "I am in possession of my own estate and my own future," she said, "free of any duress related to my uncle's guardianship or anyone else's practical usefulness to me." "I know," he said. "I want to be certain," she said, "that you understand that when I tell you that I have thought about you every day for 8 weeks, which I have, and I am choosing to tell you directly rather than perform coyness I do not feel, I am telling you that from a position of complete independence, not gratitude, not the pressure of difficult circumstances, complete independence." "I understand," he said. "I want to tell you something similarly direct." "Tell me." "I have," he said, "spent the past 8 weeks in the specific situation of a man who made an arrangement to wait 6 to 8 weeks before doing something he already knew he wanted to do, and who has discovered that patience is considerably less comfortable in practice than in theory." A pause. "I love you." I recognize this is, by most assessments, an extraordinary thing to say to someone I have known for 8 weeks, the first 3 hours of which were conducted under false pretenses. "Under necessary pretenses," she said. "Under necessary pretenses," he agreed. "I am not saying it because I believe it will be convenient for you to hear it. I am saying it because it is accurate, and because you are a person who values accuracy, and because I have apparently become someone who tells true things to the person he loves, rather than managing them into something safer." Charlotte looked at him across the library table. Outside, the Tuesday was doing what it was doing, grey and ordinary and entirely itself. "I love you as well," she said. "Since approximately the moment you moved the second teacup to my side of the table without being asked, which I recognize is a very specific and somewhat unusual thing to have been the decisive moment." "Why that specifically?" he said. "Because you did it without thinking about it," she said. "You simply saw what the situation required and you provided it. With no announcement and no expectation. That is a very particular quality. I find I have not encountered it often." He reached across the table She gave him her hand. His fingers were warm and entirely themselves. "Charlotte," he said. "Rodolphe," she said. "There is a third possibility for what comes next," he said, "beyond the two you identified on the train." "What third possibility?" "You could," he said, "be my wife for considerably longer than 3 hours." She looked at him. She thought about a Tuesday in October on a train platform at Victoria Station, and 30 seconds, and a compartment door she had opened because she had no other option. She thought about teacups and trust law and rain-blurred windows, and Scotland and Whitmore's locked drawer, and 8 weeks of letters and this library that was finally, completely hers. "That," she said, "is the most reasonable proposal I have ever heard." Epilogue. What 3 hours built? They were married in spring, not the grand London wedding that Rodolphe's title technically suggested, but a genuine ceremony in the small church nearest the Kensington house, attended by the people who had been present for the actual story rather than the social version of it. Whitmore attended, having received his invitation with the specific quiet pleasure of a man who had spent 50 years doing careful work and who appreciated from time to time watching that work arrive at its intended destination. Mrs. Holt stood in the front row and did not attempt to contain her expression, which was the expression of someone who has kept a house together through considerable difficulty and is watching the difficulty resolve into something worth the keeping. Charlotte wore a dress that was exactly itself, not performatively simple, not excessive, simply what she had chosen, which was the best description of most things Charlotte did. Rodolphe stood at the front of the church and watched her walk toward him and felt, with the specific complete clarity of a man who has spent a decade managing things from careful distance and who has been persuaded, by 30 seconds and 3 hours and 8 weeks and 1 Tuesday afternoon in a library, that distance was not the same as safety, and that the thing he had been protecting himself from was also the thing he had always needed. They went to Scotland for the first weeks of their marriage. Charlotte had wanted to return to Edinburgh, not for Whitmore or for the legal proceedings, but because Scotland, from a rain-blurred train window, was one of the first things they had looked at together, and she found she wanted to look at it again, this time from a position of not being in a hurry. They took the train from London as they had the first time. They sat in a private first-class compartment, as they had the first time. "You should sit across from me," Rodolphe said when they settled in, with the specific quality of almost a smile she had come to love as one of his most particular qualities. "I should," Charlotte agreed, and she sat across from him, and the English countryside outside the window began its long performance of autumn into border country, and she looked at him across the small table and thought, This is what 30 seconds of genuine desperation built." 3 years later, Kensington Gardens Terrace was home to a legal practice that Charlotte had established, quietly and with the specific patient competence that characterized everything she did, using her father's books and her own 6 weeks of preparation and the trust proceedings and 8 weeks of Edinburgh, and everything she had learned across 26 years of teaching herself things that her circumstances did not automatically provide. The practice was small. It specialized in trust law and the specific legal situations of women in difficult circumstances regarding guardianship and estate management. It had, in 3 years, successfully resolved 4 cases that bore resemblance in varying degrees to Charlotte's own. Rodolphe managed several of his own estate affairs from the Kensington office on Tuesday afternoons, which was not strictly necessary and was entirely deliberate. The practice had begun, as most genuinely useful things begin, not with a formal decision but with a practical response to an immediate situation. 3 months after their return from Edinburgh, a woman had come to the Kensington Gardens Terrace house asking to speak with the solicitor. She had heard, through the specific informal network through which people in difficult circumstances learn where to take those circumstances, that there was a woman in Kensington who understood trust law and the specific legal situations of women whose guardians had not managed their interests well. She had a situation. She had very little money. She needed someone who would look at the documents she had. Charlotte had looked at the documents. The situation was not identical to her own, but was adjacent to it in the specific way that made her father's books and her 6 weeks of preparation and Mr. Whitmore's guidance directly relevant. She had spent 3 days with the documents and then had written a very precise letter to the relevant parties and had achieved, for this woman, a resolution that her own resources would not have produced. Word had spread. The second case had arrived within a month, the third within 3 weeks of that, 3 weeks. Rodolphe had watched all of this with the specific expression she had come to recognize as how he looked when he found something genuinely satisfying. Not approval exactly, but the quiet pleasure of someone watching something grow in the direction it was always going to grow. "You are building exactly what your father would have built," he said one evening when the fourth case had been successfully resolved. "I am building what the situation required," she said. "Yes," he said, "that is what your father would have done." Whitmore had retired from active practice, but served as an informal advisor to the practice, appearing on Tuesday afternoons to drink tea and offer his specific brand of careful, precise analysis to whatever was on the table. The train tickets from their first journey, hers purchased at Victoria Station in a hurry, his purchased through the normal channels weeks earlier, were in the library desk drawer. Charlotte had kept them for no particular reason she had formalized, and then for the particular reason that certain objects accumulate significance through what they represent, rather than what they are. She found them one Tuesday afternoon when she was looking for something else and held them for a moment. 2 tickets on the same train, purchased independently by 2 people who had not known they would sit across from each other for 3 hours and say things that turned out to be among the most important things either of them had ever said. Rodolphe appeared in the library doorway. He saw what she was holding. "The tickets," he said. "The tickets," she agreed. "You kept them." "You kept the address," she said. 12, Kensington Gardens Terrace. "I did," he said. She put the tickets back in the drawer. She looked at him across the library that had been her father's, and that was now theirs. 30 seconds, she said. 30 seconds, he confirmed. "I had no other option," she said. "I know," he said. "I am very glad you had no other option." She was too. She sat down because she had 30 seconds and no other choice. He moved the second teacup because it was simply what the situation required. And in 3 hours on a train between London and Edinburgh, 2 people discovered that genuine love does not require grand circumstances, only the specific courage to be fully honest with someone you have just met and to trust that the honesty, met with equal honesty, might build something real. The greatest love stories are rarely planned. They begin in 30-second windows. They survive 8 weeks of difficult circumstances. They arrive eventually at a Tuesday afternoon in a library on Kensington Gardens Terrace, and they last, from there, for as long as 2 people choose to keep building them. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Tell us, have you ever made a split-second decision that changed your life completely? Subscribe for more stories of love, courage, and the boldest things people say to strangers.